and welcome back to another gathering of the Fractional Forum with a bonus guest that you might have seen. My son Nicholas, he's fractional too. He is only 6 and he's all over the place. He has good advice about every department. He'll probably be in and out. He might be sitting right behind me this entire episode. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. If this is your first time joining us for the Fractional Forum, welcome. If it's not your first time, welcome back. What is the Fractional Forum? It's a place where fractional peeps get together to have conversations about solving problems.
Like me.
A problem like Nicholas. I don't know if the timing was right on that one, but he probably will have ideas. And if he's anything like me, we won't be able to stop him from sharing them. So future fractional in the making back here. Today, we're actually talking about deep diving on problem solving. And so I'm sure there's many of you who have experienced this with a problem that manifests in a specific symptom that's maybe not telling us the entire story about the problem. And so today we're just gonna open up the conversation around problem deep diving, questions to ask, how do we get there, the benefits of multiple departments participating in these types of activities, all of the things that might come up. I'm not going to pretend this isn't distracting because yeah, he's having fun though, and we're all having fun, and that's the point, right? All right. So when it comes to problem deep diving, folks, is there anywhere in particular you want to start? Is there something that you're currently working on with a client that we can share with the crew? Not specifically the client, but an experience that you've had with one. Where do we want to begin?
I think the one thing that jumps out to me is the tendency to want to jump into solution mode super quick. And I get the logic in a way of, it seems like it puts you in a positive mindset. Let's talk solutions, right? It feels less like blame or finger pointing. However, I guess what I like to do is to take what we see as the problem. So let's talk accountability. I feel like it's a big topic of a conversation for me always. So we don't have accountability in this organization. And so instead of, automatically trying to switch it to solution or what could be perceived as positive, how can you reframe that problem is, what opportunity do we have to, reinvent accountability in our organization? And then even with that being said, the conversation feels more productive. That is one reason why I think that companies rush into solution mode. I think there's a multitude of other reasons, which maybe we can talk about that, or we can talk about the reframing or wherever you guys want to go with that. Just throwing that out there as a, jumping off point.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? Is don't jump to solution. I pulled out for today's episode a little bit of some sales training stuff that I have. And one of the steps on there is ask the best questions. And that is long before you're agreeing on what the need is, let alone the solution. You have to understand the problem first. So asking the best questions, I think, is the key step here at the start of this, right? Is what's going on in the company in a broader sense? What's going on in this particular situation? And some leverage questions of how is this affecting you as the leader, as the person in charge of this, and really trying to understand what's impacting, what's the opportunity cost of this problem, because you're not focused on something else. So really starting with lots of good questions about the broad situation, the specific situation, how that impacts you, really helps you define that problem in a better sense.
And Barrett, I would like one of the things I'm thinking of when Tim is talking about asking better questions is when it comes to the team and the employees, a lot of times there's a lot of things that people have in their head. They have thoughts, they have knowledge, they have emotions, they have all these things. And I mean, like, I'm making an assumption, but I'd love to hear your perspective on this. What are, how easily does a like people problem actually present in terms of like, I feel like this isn't a simple problem, right? Where people are just like, yep, this is the problem, you're the problem, or like this policy is the problem. Like there's usually, I'm sure there's a lot more interwoven complexity.
Yeah, there's always these sort of surface level solutions. So for example, a client will come and they go, okay, well, our vacation policy isn't working for us. Like, okay, well, we're not just going to create a new policy for you. We want to understand, what do you want to see in your organization? What are the behaviors you want to see? What are you seeing in terms of like productivity? What do you want to create? Because I think, even on a personal level, I think we get stuck into like, what is happening right now? And we get hyper focused on the problem, but we lose sight of where we actually want to go and the future we want to create. So I actually hate rushing into solving the problem right away, because you're not really going to the root cause of the problem when you do that. And so we actually do a particular approach around discovering, what is that current landscape? What does the organization look like right now? And what do you want it to look like? What are you actually trying to build? And then let's figure out what the delta is on those two things. And let's get clear first on where you want to go. Like, what is the North Star? Like, let's get clarity on that first. Because a lot of the problems that present from a people perspective are because people don't know where the organization is going. And my belief is that they're extremely resourceful. So if you give them clarity on where the organization is going, they can better problem solve as well.
I mean, I feel like in a lot of our conversations, we come back to the North Star and whether or not we actually have that identified, but also like living in the organization. And this is also making me think, a couple of weeks ago, we did an episode about how we were banishing revenue goals from like goal setting. And there's a lot, I feel like, again, a lot of people associate the problem with those like end goals, things like revenue or profit. And so like, okay, revenue is a problem. Okay, but there's a lot of things that could be contributing to that. And from a marketing perspective, it's very common for people to think, I have a revenue problem. I just need to turn up my marketing, more marketing, faster marketing. That will fix my revenue problem. And if we don't actually know what's causing the revenue problem, then why is it a problem? What's making it a problem? Is this just not enough? Not enough for what, right? Like, and there's layers to be peeled away there. But if you haven't done marketing strategically before, to the point where you have data that would say, I can just turn up my marketing efforts and that will turn up my leads, and they're good leads and sales can close those leads and all of these things are connected, then just turning up the marketing isn't going to solve the problem. So there's probably a marketer out there somewhere that will be like, yep, just get an email funnel. That'll solve your problem. And a lot of people invest in those types of things. I saw your face on that one, Tim. Is like, I've never seen that work. And people can sell you that, but like the likelihood of it working is very low. But also, I think that comes down to, again, as the, shall we call them the problem owner, right? You're the one who has the problem, who owns the problem. Are you going to keep chasing what seem like the quick fixes, which haven't to date fixed anything? And if those quick fixes haven't fixed anything, then I feel like taking a step back and do some deep dive on your problem discovery is a good opportunity. But then you also, like you mentioned, Tim, you got to have someone asking you good questions, right? If you're just sitting here in your office by yourself as a CEO trying to figure this out, that's a lot harder than if we just like have someone who can ask us good questions.
Well, and to build on what you're talking about there, and using the example of marketing leads and sales, all those points of view are really important too. So it's not just asking the best questions of the problem owner, it's asking the best questions of all the people that surround the problem. You can't talk about sales when sales isn't in the room. You can't talk about marketing when marketing is in the room. You need to have their point of view to really understand what's going on. Maybe all the leads that marketing is given is really small potatoes, and they're good, but they're not going to help you meet the revenue goal because they take a lot of time for little gain, right? So you want to make sure you have all those points of view in the room when you're defining that problem, or have those conversations separately so you have different perspectives.
Ooh, can we talk about that? Because I like,
yeah, I want to talk about that.
Okay, good. Because like, I've been a part of a lot of organizations where like there are good resources asking good questions, but they're all in different rooms and the conversations are not connected. And it's not that any one of those conversations on its own hasn't been productive, but then like kind of rolling into the accountability part of this, right? Like if we're not all informed, I'm actually dealing with this right now, right? That I'm working with a client, there's been some like, sounds like really exciting strategic conversations that have happened that I was not a party to. I have a strategic role in the organization and I am not getting the information and I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with that. And there's also then this, I don't know if it is a like full transparency conversation or what it is. I know a lot of times people think they're being helpful by only giving you the information they think you need. But I've found like very much as a strategic resource, I need all the information, right? Like, I can't do strategic marketing if I don't know what sales is doing, right? Like I can do marketing, but I can't do strategic marketing. So if I'm here to do strategic marketing, I need to know what sales is doing. And the easiest way to do that is to be in the room with sales, having the conversations about the things that they're doing. So I'd love to hear the rest of your like experiences with that, because I do think as fractional people, we get siloed. We like almost naturally silo ourselves, right? Because I'm going to say I'm a fractional marketer. So like come and plot me in the marketing department, but I can't actually do meaningful marketing unless I'm connected to the other resources in a meaningful conversation.
I mean, like, why is that? Why does this continue to happen? We talk about this all the time on this show about diverse perspectives and the power of diverse perspectives. And then also how by bringing different individuals to the team does have a result in ownership in the outcomes. But it is a thing. And I think we can make a lot of assumptions. Like Tracy, you said, perhaps they're doing it to make my role easier. They think they're helping, supporting me. Maybe it's because you're too busy, not like the business, right? So you have some deadlines, you have some objectives underway, and you don't feel like those resources have the time to be part of this conversation. But that kind of could be perpetuating the problem. And in fact, maybe that is the problem, right? If an organization, an individual, a department is jumping into solutioning very, very quick, I'm going to guess it's because they have the habit or kind of the culture or behavioral tendency to be rushing consistently, right? Like a little game of whack-a-mole, if you will. It's not even firefighting anymore. It's just whack-a-mole. So I don't know. I guess like I want to throw that out there. Why is that happens? What have you guys experienced as if you were to push that conversation, which I know, Tracy, you definitely do. I know we talked about the no thing last week. So, and we all want to challenge, that's the outside perspective. what have you guys heard back on that? Like, why aren't you involving me? Why aren't you involving this person? Why aren't we bringing in sales? Like, I feel like, you know, we need to be having this discussion with an HR representative. And what have you guys heard?
So
I
I've experienced this a lot in my world because, you know, you're coming into an engagement. They've never had, well, for myself, they've never had HR before. So my responsibility isn't just the doing, it's also educating on what is possible and where the lines intersect, right? Anything to do with people, there's an opportunity to bring the conversation in to us so that we can be more strategic, so that we can make better decisions, so that we can align to the North Star. So part of the role of a fractional is also around education, not just the delivery of solving the problem.
One of the things I've observed in a lot of places is a lack of understanding or putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And so sometimes if we're in a role, let's pick on marketing, because we always love to pick on marketing from sales perspective.
I can take it.
But if you don't understand what the salesperson is doing with those leads and the sales conversations and how those things go, then you're kind of just looking with blinders on of what is a good handoff. When really understanding what do they do with this, what happens, and then from sales working with ops, so they understand what happens to get the thing done, to deliver on the promise, right? A lot of good salespeople come from an operations world and they bring that, but you still need to keep in touch. You still need to understand what's going on. And that's one of the things I try to do in many engagements is get out to the front line and understand what's going on out there. So that how are they serving customers? So whatever we're trying to solve, what are we trying to do out in the front line, and how do we make that more effective in whatever role we're taking on? And having that understanding and shared vision of what goes on between teams goes a long ways. And sometimes you have to put up walls. So that's a sales problem. Let them worry about it. Is it? It's an us problem. Let's get into this together.
Oh, I love that phrase, the us problem, right? Because this is, and I mean, like, I'll throw it back at sales just because sales and marketing a lot of times aren't operating functionally together. But like a lot of times I get like, no, we can't focus on marketing right now because sales has a problem. And this is what we're doing from a like fixing the sales problem perspective. And like all of our focus and all of our mindset and all of our time and all of our things are going to fixing this sales problem. And I'm like, but this is a marketing problem. This is an us problem, right? Because I could be, as a marketer, participating in activities that drive sales. And now I'm being actually told not to because we're too busy fixing the sales problem. And like, and then these are the things where I, as like, and I don't, again, like, I wouldn't say this is every fractional is going to be able to offer this, but as like most of the people that we have on this show operate in the like cross-functional seeing arena. So we may focus on doing in a very specific arena, but we are very good at cross-functional seeing. And so I see that I could contribute to what you're considering a sales problem by doing this in marketing. Or maybe it's a people thing, or maybe it's an ops thing, or like I could do this better in marketing if I'm working with ops on this, right? Which is actually something else that I'm working on with a client. They're like, hey, I want to get more information from like what's currently going on. Is there a way you guys are tracking that I could just like see, so I could just like get my peepers in there and I don't have to bother you with things, but like there's like so much opportunity for that cross functionality to exist without putting so much load on like a CEO, which I think is also very common from a like CEO experience perspective of working with fractional, because now you're like, oh, well, now I have these 4 people. I have to align all these 4 people. Well, actually, these 4 people are very good at aligning themselves. And if you just like let them align themselves, then that could probably happen without you overseeing it. And then it comes into like, we all have our like personal experience of what our role is in a business. And especially from a CEO founder perspective, right? These people have built these businesses up from nothing into like legitimate businesses. There's ownership there. There's historic responsibilities there that people might be trying to like transition out of. There's just a lot of complex things. So I don't know. Like for me, at the end of the day, I always come back to like, if there's complex things, let's not pretend it's as simple as the IKEA society that Aaron is mentioning in the chat, right? Do things quick and cheap, right? Like, I mean, and he goes on to add there also tends to be a cultural issue. That issue should be, we all know how I feel about shoulds, should be fixed quickly and bandages put on them. You need to have both containment and countermeasures. So I think you're right, Aaron. A lot of people focus on the easy fix instead of a true problem. And I don't know. I'm going to stop talking now, because now I feel like I could go on a rant about like ego and how ego keeps us in like easy fixes instead of deep diving problems. But I'm going to let someone else
Okay,
talk.
so I'll go there, Tracy. I'll go there. So first of all, I think one thing we should wrap this up. It would be amazing, not wrap up the show, wrap up this point about that the four of us all agree. And I would love if it was a, movement that the solution is likely never that first thing that's there. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of horsepower, diversity and perspective. And some of that diversity and perspective that isn't emotionally tied to how we got here and what you're feeling like as far as being in the business for 20 years, have a second mortgage on your home, that kind of perspective. But I think we can all agree that it's something that can't be a quick fix. If it is a quick fix, it's going to come back up. It might surface in sales initially, then it'll surface in operations later. And then if operation does a quick fix, whoa, it's going to surface in HR. And then HR.
I like the Band-Aid
totally.
Analogy. And but then in that scenario, I think it's good, because then people see a Band-Aid, bandage, whatever, as temporary. Right. So if we could also pivot our language to like, this is not a quick fix. This is a Band-Aid. We all realize that we're putting a Band-Aid on this, and Band-Aid is eventually going to fall off.
Well,
so we talked about emotion, right? And Tracy, I think you threw out the word with ego. And I think ego is definitely part of it, but it's pride. I feel like that's a more comfortable word, in that willingness to stop the way you're doing things and do something differently, because there's that, what if I've been doing it wrong all this time, right? Like there is some fear around that. Like, I mean, maybe, okay, so sorry, I'm going to backtrack on the word doing it wrong. But sometimes, like, we bring in a new software into a company, and I'm going to throw out Keith's perspective. He always says that technology can, amplify things in a positive or negative ways. So we bring on new technology, and all of a sudden we see some negative things that are bubbling to the surface. Yeah, but then you look back and it's like, well, we just spent $50,000 onboarding this technology. Like we got to keep going ahead with it. Like, we have all of the data in the technology, and we have to start using it, instead of stopping and saying, why aren't we using the tool or technology? What is happening before or after that's causing this? Is it the way we're working as a team? The culture around even feedback, that why we got this far to be in this situation. Sorry, I cut you off, Tim. It's just Tracy throw, which I think is definitely something to consider when wanting to go and deep dive into what it actually comes from.
Well, that was the early point I was making about leveraging. How does this affect you? And really trying to understand that, right? And going throughout that problem discovery, I'll call it, to understand how it affects different individuals. If you don't do that well, your quick fix may actually create other problems. I'm thinking quite a bit as we go through this show about an operations person that was upset the sales team was contacting a supplier, and mistakenly and wrongly, I was directed not to have my team phone. It created a bigger problem because now this ops person was getting all of the calls that the salesperson would have made to the supplier instead, and not filtering out different options, product availability, all that kind of stuff. And it actually made it worse for them. So it's really making sure that you understand all the problem and the different points of view so that your quick fix doesn't become a bigger problem.
Our Band-Aid. Let's call it Band-Aid
Yeah.
from now on.
And with emotions, that is often why having that outside perspective coming in and asking those questions and creating the spaces for that collaboration, value stream mapping on trying to find bottlenecks, the 5 whys, root cause analysis, whatever methodology you value as a company. But having that outside perspective, the great thing about it is that there is no emotional tie to this is how we've always done it type of scenarios. Because there's a lot of even like habits and behaviors, and I use the word pride, but into how we do it. And then we think, start to think, well, okay, project myself in the future and think about, I have to change the way I'm doing it. That could, in itself could cause some fear around change. So there's so many things I think that end up blocking us to really even maybe not like allow ourselves the time to do it, or go back to it. If we do a Band-Aid, go back. But also like fear around what we uncover by doing that deep dive.
I think with the emotional piece that you're talking about too, and having, you can use a methodology, you can use whatever, but playing back the problem with emotional detachment is something that you bring from the outside too. So you can play back and say, do we agree that this is the problem? And you can take out finger pointing, you can take out some of the blame game, and you can at least make sure everybody agrees on the problem that you're trying to solve, because that builds that better shared understanding of what's going on across different business lines in that process.
But I like, Vered, I'd love to hear again kind of the like cultural perspective on this, because I think too, like if the business culture to date hasn't been one of we or us, it's been like very siloed. Maybe it's because of an industry, or like these things happen for a variety of different reasons. But like, I feel like this is a project to move from, if we are currently in a state, I mean, like, let's talk about deep dive in a problem, right? If we're currently in a state where this is always just being served, and maybe it's even like my brain is saying, why are we even categorize it as a sales problem, right?
Well,
like,
I'm going to go back to Erin's comment, because I think there's a lot of good nuggets in there just around how, as humans, we're naturally just a little short-sighted. Like we get impatient. We don't want things to drag out. And so it's hard for us when we can't see a quick fix. And so a lot of the times, I think when you're working on, a new engagement, it's comforting for the business owner to know that you have a plan. Like these are the step changes. And then if you can communicate that across the board to the organization, at least they have something in place. They know it's going to be solved, and there's some level of a timeline around that, even if there's step changes to get you there. So that's number one. I think we don't like not knowing. And so there needs to be some level of a plan in place to just kind of soothe and comfort the whole team. The other thing that I've noticed, a lot of engagements I walk into, is they don't have a good structure around communication. And so a lot of the things that we start to bring into the organization is first of all, getting to know all the players, leaders, getting to know what their capabilities are, their experience with HR in the past. Do we need to level set on what is possible? And then how do we connect them? How do we actually use their experiences so that they can start to leverage that as a collective? And so sometimes what we end up doing is creating sort of like a little peer group where they can start to, maybe on a monthly basis, connect with one another, talk about what's happening in their respective departments, and they start to problem solve together. But just building those kind of opportunities doesn't come naturally to a lot of organizations.
Yeah, I think that it's so interesting. Like, a lot of these problems exist because the human psyche naturally does these things, right? Like you said, Mary, we naturally jump to I'm feeling pain. How can I get out of my pain, right? I want to get out of my pain as fast as possible. And what happens though in those scenarios where the pain is a deep pain, right? And we have to go through those exercises of feeling uncomfortable in order to actually solve the problem. And I mean, I've seen so often just layers upon layers upon layers of Band-Aids on stuff, and so much so to the degree where we forget that there's layers and layers and layers of Band-Aids on this. And now we've actually maybe covered up more than uncovered. And then at the end of the day, we kind of have to get back to the uncovering practice. And the uncovering it's a skill, right? It's a skill that you get better at when you practice. And so if the practice that you get is putting on Band-Aids, then you don't actually get better at the skill of uncovering. You don't get better at being uncomfortable because we're just let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And I think actually, I want to go to the comments because I know Erin has a comment here about Toyota. Problems are gold is a mindset many organizations do not have. One of the principles of Toyota is stopping to identify issues and get them fixed, which is why they have one of the best qualities in the world. It's celebrated to get a fix done.
So
SpaceX and forget the value of, sorry, I'm just going to finish reading.
That's okay. I thought you were done.
Celebrates their failures and looks at it as a learning opportunity. It's a mindset and cultural issue. And I do think that this is, again, we have a sales problem. Let's do all these sales things. And we don't really think about the mindset. We think about the doing. We don't think about the value of the activity in that deep dive, in the mindset shifts, in the practicing being uncomfortable and in those types of things.
But if people are resourceful and they are able to solve their problems, you just have to get them in a room together. And I also agree. I think friction creates opportunity.
So what if, take it back to goals last week. We've been talking about goals off and on the last few weeks. And I've been reading this book, The Power of Habit. Awesome book. And there was a story in this book about having a very simple thing, a focus in a business. So a business owner comes into this business and his focus on safety. And it blew everyone's mind that was, wow, it's not about, diversifying into a new market or increasing revenue or profit or whatever it was. It was just safety. And it was really disappointing. But what if a company's focus was on solving our problems? And that was it. And everything came through that lens. And I know that it seems well, that's insane. Why would we do that? But you would have to work to clear out all the obstacles in your way of solving problems. So Allie threw up a comment Great discussion. Most of these issues can be better tackled when organizations promote psychological safety. So, I mean, that's, if an organization's one goal for the year, starting at the top, was solving problems, and that, and it was around no band-aiding and fixing. Imagine all the trickle down of like the way an organization would start to run. Those
But also,
conversations would be valued and rewarded, like bringing the right people together.
I also have this like personal experience in my personal journey that when your identity becomes one of problem solver, often you're also creating problems for you to solve. So it's an interesting balance, because in that scenario, you don't necessarily know if there's people in your organization that are like that. And then you get into these like, oh, we're going to track how many problems were solved, and you're going to get a bonus based on how many problems you solve. Well, I'm going to be like, well, now I'm going to tell you that this is a problem, and I'm going to fix this problem. And then like, you can also, and coming back to the like cultural component of it, right? Like what are the underlying ways of behaving that fill this organization? And also, I think too, like, if we're going for volume of problem solving, then we could probably keep it very high level from a problem solving perspective still, right? And just say like problem band-aid, problem band-aid, problem band-aid. So like, I think it's more, I mean, for me, I think it comes back to that curiosity, the questions where like Tim started, right? Like, what is the culture from a curiosity point of view? And do people even have time to be curious? Does everyone have it in their job description that they are encouraged to be curious about these types of things? Are we making sure from a leadership team that our people have time to be curious? If I've got somebody who's working 40 hours a week and just hustling to get done the stuff they have to get done, like, let's be honest, they don't have time to be curious. They just have time to execute. So then who's being curious? Okay, am I as the leadership team being curious and I just have like executors over there? Okay, that's fine. But also then, like, if I look at my own personal culture, which is like very intricately tied into curiosity, like if I'm going to have a marketing coordinator work for me, I want them to have time to question what I'm telling them to do. Because I want to make sure that I have a checkpoint of someone being curious about what I'm doing. I'm not just running wild over here being like, do this, do this, do this, do this. And when we get, I think too, when we identify a problem and we look at, again, I'm just going to come back to revenue problems because this is top of mind for me right now, is like, if an identified problem is revenue generation, and all you're doing is anything that is revenue generating, then I also think we have to be curious about, are all of these things I'm doing in my 8-hour day actually revenue generating? Because as a solopreneur, I will tell you the number of things I was doing in corporate that were revenue generating was a very small percentage. And as a solopreneur, this is actually something I've had to learn, because I don't want to work 80 hours a week. I want to work X amount of hours a week. So I got to be like really intentional with my activities. And I don't think from a just, again, day-to-day way of being. Once we get into a job description, we're like, well, these are just the things I do. This happens to marketing coordinators all of the time, folks. Like, and I don't know if you guys have specific examples of roles where this happens too, but for marketing coordinators, people just like slam their day full of doing stuff. There's no room for that person to think about anything. I've worked with sales teams where they got to make 125 calls a day. You think that those guys have time to think about any of those calls? No, they don't. Or they can't get curious about where my list came from, or why I'm getting this kind of response, or whether or not 9 a.m. is better than 2. Like, you don't even have time to think about it because you're so busy executing. So like, I don't think in those types of scenarios we ever create, like, our way of being is not leading towards a desire for deep dive problem understanding. It is just do Band-Aid, do Band-Aid, do Band-Aid. And then you're like Frankenstein stitched together. And then you're like, I wonder why this plane doesn't fly.
Have you guys ever heard of the difference between producing and production?
Yeah.
Have you guys ever thought of that, right? So as you were speaking there, Tracy, I was thinking about that, you know, doing all the things, the marketing coordinator. Yes, I've had ops coordinators, project managers who, yep, they have no time. In fact, they're probably at a time deficit, the way that they're scheduled and the amount of, you know, hours or estimates that are going into what they have to do to complete their tasks. It's not allowing for any interruptions or anything. So what are they doing? They're just doing production, right? But until you actually tie some data or KPIs or some goals and accountability back to goals into that, you don't really know whether what you're working on is producing, right? There's a difference between that. And the other thing that popped up to me, oh my gosh, I just lost it. Someone's going to take it away. But yes.
Nicholas is distracting everybody.
I was going to say that. It's the mother in me. I'm just like watching him.
It's not him this time with his sideways camera and the lights out.
It's got to be somebody. You're welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you for taking a load off me. I want to go back to what you were saying, Lindsay, about a goal of solving problems. And the powerful thing in what you're saying there is empowerment. And I think a lot of people don't feel that they're empowered to solve some of those problems. And I was thinking about this really silly story from my first job back at the Linden Co-op when I was 16, and customers would sign the invoices. And there was pens that didn't work all the time at the front counter. And it wasn't until one customer took it and threw it out, and I went, I could do that. I could throw out broken pens. And I suddenly felt empowered to solve that tiny little problem. But up until that point, I'm just a 16-year-old kid. Like, the boss keeps these pens here. I don't think it's my place to throw them out. So instead, I had customers going through 6 pens trying to find one that works. But it's about empowerment and making sure people feel empowered that they can throw out that broken pen because it's not working. And I see that in a lot of organizations is that you just haven't created that culture. You haven't created that discussion about problems that you're like, hey, you're right, that's a problem. Why don't you go solve that? That's something you can go do. And people will feel more engaged. They'll feel a bigger part of what you're trying to do because they're helping to make it better. And so I think that's the real powerful thing there is that empowerment of people.
Well, and I think this also ties into Ali's comment here about human beings versus human doings, right? Like that throwing out the pens doesn't work. It probably is not ever going to be on a thing that's on a checklist to do. But when you're being helpful to customers and you're empowered to be helpful to customers, then you throw out the pens that don't work and you replace them with pens that work. I think we spend so much time trying to get like a magnifying glass on all of the activities that people are doing that we forget to step back and say, like, what does that activity do for our organization? How does it limit? I did a lot of work in customer experience, and I used to call these things golden handcuffs, right? Is that we would tell people how they could help a customer. And now I can't actually help the customer because you have limited me so much as to what I'm allowed to do. I can't be helpful anymore. And now what we tried to do with that process doesn't deliver that experience. And so now, again, like as a low-level employee, right, who's on the front line, which should never be considered the low-level employees, crazy. But like these people, they don't have the ability to make those types of changes, to do what they would do, to be how they would be. And we're like collecting all this data in other places about like, oh, this is how many likes get, no, who cares? If our problem is that we can't build a meaningful relationship with our customers, then like, I mean, like, yeah, that can be reflected in our marketing efforts, but like, it can't just be reflected in a marketing effort. And if a marketing survey reveals this, and I'm not allowed to talk to ops about how they're delivering a project, right? Like, then what's the point? I think again on the Fractional Forum, we come back to like, how are we working together to get stuff done? But you guys know, I mean, I don't want to talk in circles. That's not the goal of the show. But I mean, like, this kind of harkens back to your question, Lindsay, earlier. Like, why does this happen? Why do we constantly get sucked into the quick fix, the band-aids? Why do we constantly get sucked up into like, let's just make this one department's problem? And like, how about we use our last 14 minutes to talk about like, okay, this is how we observe this, but how can we break it down? Right? We want to break down those silos. We want to break down the band-aids. What are some of the questions that you guys have found successful in breaking down those barriers? Where are some of the like success stories that you've experienced when people move past band-aid phase to like, let's get real? How are we going to fix this?
So I'm just going to interject here. And I think, I've been doing this for a while now. And I think what I started with was, yes, the quick fix, the problem solving, here's your deliverable, to, wait a minute, there needs to be some level of behavioral change here. If we want to actually shift to this future state, this organization that is running well, where people are engaged, then there needs to be a behavioral change. So level setting at the beginning of the engagement, like, this is a partnership. We are doing this together. There needs to be some behavioral changes. There's some change management that is going to be incorporated in this engagement. And what that looks like is that there needs to be problem awareness, right? The desire to change, and the space and the want to up-level our skill sets and our capabilities and the way that we lead. So that's definitely been a learning for me in terms of deep diving into the problem and coming up with a sustainable solution.
I think behaviors it's a tough nut to crack. That is exactly why I'm reading this Power of Habit book, because it talks about three different things on a cycle of habits. And the first is your trigger. And then your second is your routine. And then your last is the reward. So if you think about it, there's going to be triggers all the time to get back into that. We've talked about time in a way of deficit a lot today. Like, that's why companies or individuals aren't spending the time to get to the root cause, because they don't have the time. They're at a time deficit, right? Like, they're in production, they're not producing. So they're at a time deficit, overscheduled. So if we think about that, and we clear the roads and we put in the processes and systems in place for them to start to be successful to do this, the trouble is the trigger comes in where you become the victim of your own success and you get this massive influx of work. How many organizations, that's the trigger, like too much work. So now that you're at a time deficit again, you go back into the same routine of whack-a-mole and quick fixes. So it takes a ton of dedication, because those behavioral like habits could be going on for years. And all the individuals in the organization could potentially are enabling or are just complying, if you will, to the behaviors or the way. But it is very doing and not being. There is no, intention. So I would even challenge that once you kind of get to that and you have the foundation laid, your work is even not done there, because you potentially could get sucked right back into that vortex of quick fixes and workarounds. Like, those are swear words to me. Like, Tracy, how you say should is your swear word. A workaround is a swear word for me. It's a huge swear word because it will come back up. It will. And I challenge that people do circle back to do that work after the fact. It's like, nope, it's off my desk. It's not important anymore. It's not impacting my life. It's not impacting our success as a company. And then soon enough, it will. So and it's a mindset thing when you think of proactivity versus reactivity, because that time is either going to be spent in a way that you have, in a meaningful way where potentially you can influence how that time is used, or it'll come back at you when you don't want it to. The best person's on holidays, and the strongest technical and the only person who knows how to do IT in your company is all on holidays. That's when it's going to come, right? Isn't that Murphy's Law?
Well, and I think, like, I think we should start swear jars for these things. And every time we hear like people say them, and I'm gonna like make my clients pay me quarters. Like every time you use the word should when it's about marketing, you owe me a loonie and put it in this digital jar. I know you can use the actual swear words as much as you want, but like when no more shoulds, no more workarounds. And then, like, I have a background in software too, right? Like hacks, same category, right? Every time you're hacking something into your software, it is not permanent. It is going to break at some point, right? You just don't know when. And you're probably going to have to come in on the weekend to fix that because that's when it's going to break. But we're also, like, from a marketing perspective, we're sold a lot of this, right? We're sold the easy button. We're sold quick fixes. We're sold magic bullets. We're like consistently being served with this message that is available. And I also think we need to be able to like take a stand for our own beliefs and say, like, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in I believe in doing things right. And sometimes that means it might be quick. It might mean that Tim can just throw away the pens. This is a really good example because that is quick. It's a very quick fix, right? And it does actually solve the problem. But when the like perspective and the beingness is behind, like, how are we observing what we're doing, and how do we create time for that observation? I actually I was going through an interview process with a potential client at one point, and I had so many people who I was talking to in the organization tell me, you'll never get ahead of this portfolio. This, like, oh, if you have time for that, I'd be surprised. And I was like, what is happening here? Is this, do you want me to fix this problem? Because it sounds like whoever you get in here, you want them to just continue to reiterate the current problem.
Just add more pens. Keep adding more pens.
I'm confused because, and I remember saying this, I'm like, you guys should know that when you say these types of things to me, my perspective on that is challenge accepted. And I have every single intention of proving to you that this is not get aheadable, right? Like, I am Captain Kirk and I don't believe in the no-win scenario. Right? I believe that we haven't gotten curious enough about the problem to figure out what the fix is. And so if you bring me in, that's what I'm going to do. But no, I'm not going to keep doing all of this broken stuff. Like, what's the point in that? And I'm pretty sure they hired somebody to keep doing all the broken stuff, and it's fine. But like,
I love Tracy. You switch to the horizontal finger when you get all like lit up and passionate about something. Your hand goes to the point. This is the point.
I need like a GIF of this.
I don't know if I'm cutting you off, Lindsay. I don't know if you had a thought you were going to go there, but I was going to jump in.
It's all good.
I was going to jump in about the looking at the problem and all the perspectives. And I forget what you just said a second ago, Tracy, but it triggered this thought. Is that part of looking at solving a problem is making sure you're not looking at it in silos and looking at it only from the perspective of operations or marketing or finance, and building trust in other areas. Because if we talk about sales as this faceless organization or marketing as this faceless group, there's no trust there. And so I think back to a previous company I was at where we set up meetings with customers, with directors across the entire company. And so two things came out of that. One is you had people that had never met with a customer before go meet with customers. So that was huge. You had the HR director meeting with customers, you had finance meeting with customers. But the second and almost bigger was the fact that people that don't spend time together had hours of windshield time together traveling to the customer site.
Mm.
And so that was a huge win out of that we didn't expect. We went in, get people to meet with customers. That was all the focus. But in review, it was that chance to break down silos, to build trust, to understand perspectives. That was the huge value. So are you creating those opportunities in your organization to break down silos, walk in somebody else's shoes, build trust so that you can have better problem solving?
Oh, but Tim, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for our people to build relationships with each other. They're too busy doing things that aren't fixing our problem.
You don't have time to be better. That's what you're saying. You
Yeah.
don't have time
But
to be
it's
better.
so, I mean, I would like to say that that's not the truth, but like these are the things. And I think, again, hopefully, one of the things that like a fractional perspective could add to an organization is just some reframing around this. Like this is what you're doing. And it's the message you're sending. Is that the message you want to send? Because so often this is unintentional, right? These types of things they start to happen, and it's very common, right? So when it's common, then people think that that's the way it's supposed to be, and they don't ask those questions about, is that what we want to do? But we are a company. I had a client once who was just all about like creating beautiful things, right? And I was just like, okay, so she was all paranoid about this email funnel that she was trying to make. And I was like, okay, so like when you're doing that activity, does it feel like you're creating beautiful things? And she was like, oh, no. I'm like, okay, well, if you're all about creating beautiful things, she's a photographer, right? Like maybe this isn't the activity that contributes to that. And I'm not saying don't do marketing, right? But maybe that's not the one that we really want to focus on. And she was like, yo, I have so much fun doing these like Instagram reels. And I feel like so impact. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that and not this email thing, right? Like, again, when we're actually having the conversations that matter and we allow ourselves to be drawn into those conversations that allow us to get back to our why, our way of being, like how we really want to fix the problems that we came here to fix with this business, I think we do get to the opportunity of creating quick opportunities, right? Like we do, but we got to get to that depth first.
Can I just say one quick thing about conversations? It doesn't have to be like what Tim spoke about, the windshield time and going to sales calls and having the opportunity to travel. That's, it was quite specific. But if it is just about the conversation, the one-to-one just conversation with people on your team, or maybe there is some intentional about, cross-functional conversations, if that is the goal, that is super powerful. I had a one-to-one this week with one of the companies that I work with. And so there's 3 leaders that I'm accountable to have one-to-ones with. And it was so impactful. Simple kind of questions that, just about how's it going and removing barriers. And the individual who brought this initiative to this organization, he said, it's like the opportunity to put your arms around the person in a way of like, building that trust, building that relationship and having those conversations. And then as a result of that, those conversations become part of your behaviors, part of your habits. So, maybe the problems don't wait for those conversations. Now the conversations continue, and then it becomes like a whole cultural thing across the organization. So just something to point out, like the conversations once again, and communicating and how you support that and reward that in your organization is really something to consider.
Yeah, I think this is totally true. And I want to just grab it, Ali's last comment here about how Jim Rohn said, if you're working on your job more than you're working on yourself, you need to stop and think. And the same applies to organizations. I think it's just a really great takeaway from the show, is if we just like constantly, I like to use the separation between leading and chasing. If we always feel like we're chasing, why are we always feeling like we're chasing? Let's deep dive that. Let's figure out, is it a mindset? Is it an activity? Is it a habit? Like what is driving that chasing if we want to be leading? And let's just ask the question and give ourselves time to ask the question. I think that's it. Give ourselves time to ask questions, and think about good questions, not just any questions, but good questions as well. Oh, friends, that brings us to the end of another Fractional Forum. For those of you who happen to be in the chat and are also fractional, I know we've made this offer before, but if you would like to get into the conversation, please reach out to one of us. We are always interested in hearing more diverse perspectives, because that's what this show is all about. So reach out to us. We can get you on a future episode, and we would love to have your voice in the conversation. With that, we'll see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.